I want to start on the more extreme part of the scale, and
Okay.
we'll come back from there. Because
Okay,
the
fair enough.
being able to treat nightmares is definitely something I want to make sure we get to. But
Yeah.
it's so unique that you've worked with the FBI in these really high stakes scenarios. People that I'm sure, I mean, I've read plenty of books of even police detectives in random towns have a real tough time because they're seeing, and firefighters as well, they're seeing
Yeah.
kind of the worst of humanity. They're seeing like
Mhm.
an exploding body because of the gases after they've died. They
Yeah.
see crime and blood and all these things, and you kind of can't scrub that from your memory. So I'd love to know, specifically in your work that you've done in these cases,
Yeah.
how are you helping these people? Because I mean, right now we're looking at MDMA for PTSD. We're looking at
Mhm.
all these pharmas like
Psilocybin, yes.
yeah, exactly. So what's your first step when dealing with someone that's maybe been through more of these traumatic events?
Sure. So, just to give like a little disclaimer, yes, I work for the FBI, but everything that I'm going to say here is my own thoughts, opinions, feelings, beliefs, and this podcast is not sponsored by the FBI or endorsed. So, just putting that out there. But
Noted.
in my work, I do a good amount of nightmare work, and again, I just think that it's not out there enough that people know that we can treat it, or I should say, whenever it comes to nightmares that are recurrent and it's the same one that happens over and over again, we do have a treatment that is very effective for it, and it's called imagery rehearsal therapy. I first learned about this at the VA, and I've since pulled it out of my bag of tricks whenever it is that I need it, and it is so incredibly effective. So let me back
Wow.
up and talk about, like you mentioned, whenever it comes to any type of first responder or military, but also too, regular civilians can also fall into this category as well. But oftentimes when we're trying to meet the mission, we ask people to see and do a lot of things that are just not normal for human beings. Like, this is not something that people should be as exposed to, like you said, like firefighters, police, first responders, like military. These are abnormal stressors. And so what we're seeing whenever it comes to nightmares and post-traumatic stress injury is that people are having a normal response to being exposed to an abnormal situation. And I think that it's really important that we frame it that way. So, what's happening at night, one of the many, many important features of all of the different stages of sleep that we go through is we go through something that I kind of like to call an emotional detox. And that the brain, whether we like, if we just kind of back up and just think about anybody on a typical day, your brain takes in so much information all day. Like, think about your eyes, your ears, like all of your senses, like touch. All of these pieces of information are coming in through the senses, and your brain can't possibly hold all that or store all of that, and nor should we. So at night, one of the many functions is that we need to shift and sift through all of this and decide what is relevant for me, what's important, what's not important, and then figuring out where that goes. And a piece of that is also working through emotions and emotion regulation. And that's going to be a very big piece whenever we have people who are exposed to things that are traumatic. And so oftentimes whenever we end up with a nightmare, what's happening is that we're trying to process through something that has happened, whether it's happened just that day, or maybe something has triggered us, maybe a sight, a smell, a thought, a memory, a person. And so we're working through something at night, whatever the brain thinks that it needs to process on. And
Hmm.
we often end up with a nightmare because adrenaline and cortisol are so high that we're trying to process, we're trying to work through, and yet we wake up from a nightmare because our adrenaline and our cortisol are so high. And the brain doesn't like to leave things left undone. It doesn't like to just half do things. So
Right.
the next night it's like, all right, well, we're going to try again. And that's oftentimes where we get into this cycle of this repetitive nightmare, is that the brain is trying to do its job. It's trying to process through, it's trying to do this emotional detox. And yet our adrenaline and our cortisol are just too high to allow that to happen.